thank you so much. Please let me know where you are joining us from, what subject you teach, what subject you teach, sorry, and the age groups that you teach. So thank you, everybody, joining me. Okay, we've got people from Myanmar, Pakistan, Nigeria, Egypt, and an interesting selection of subjects, as always, and age groups. Okay, so I'll try my best to be able to give you the most amount of examples. Okay, so thank you so much for joining us from Saudi as well, from Saudi Arabia. Excellent. So thank you so much. It's nice to see some repeated names. Some of your names after all these years I recognize. It's good to see everybody here. Ghana as well. Fantastic. So thank you so much. As we know, this month we are focusing on assessment. You are coming towards the end, second half of the year. In your case, in my case, we are starting. My academic calendar starts in March. You are on the second semester where we sometimes start to focus a bit more on assessment. So the idea of today is to explore diverse strategies and techniques that we can employ in teaching. So let's have a look at the plan for today. Oh, yes, I'm being unrecorded. So by the end of today's session, you'll be discussing, you'll discuss personal feelings about tests and student and a teacher, as a student and a teacher. Revise some basic principles of tests, and of course discuss practical ideas to implement in your classroom. So first of all, let's think about our own experiences as when we were students. And I want you to, in the chat, let me know, how did you feel when you were a student? How did you feel about tests? It could be recent as well, or thank you, Tamara, you're already starting, stressed and worried, nervous. I was always disappointed when it came to testing because I'm not a good tester. Exams for me were awful. I always suffered a lot. One of my greatest frustrations is that I do not have a good memory. So I'm very good at analyzing. I'm very good at realizing the critical thinking part, but that critical thinking cannot be done, in my case, at the moment of an exam. I struggle a lot with that. So because I don't have very good memory, I don't have the ability to remember facts. And in order to be able to really develop and really show your knowledge in a test, you need to remember facts. And from those facts, you can expand, you can, nowadays we're no longer testing memory. We know that we have different aspects and we try to help them. But in my case, I struggled a lot with that. Because I don't have the ability to memorize anything, it's awful. I struggled a lot, plus the nervousness of as many of you felt. So I always passed. It's not that I failed, but I never saw my true potential in a test, and I don't think I ever will. And as an adult, I stand here after 20 years of being a teacher. I'm not worried anymore. I know that when I do assignments, that sort of thing is when that's where I excel. I excel in assignments because I've got the things that I would need to memorize with me, and then I can develop that. As a teacher, How do you feel when your students sit for a test? I hate supervising tests, to be honest. I see my students' faces. I get nervous. I think sometimes it might reflect poorly on me in the sense that it's my fault. They're not resulting in, in something very powerful. I'm very worried about that. Me testing, my students sit for the international exams and the results come in December. My family knows that day you might not be able to speak to me because I will be in a very good mood or in a very bad mood. I don't have in the middle because I suffer with my students. So once I get the results, look at them and I'm seeing, am I happy or not? Does this student get the grade that they should have? Luckily, my subject, they also have some things to submit. So we do have, it's a fairer alternative. It's not just, the exam, but there's also some things that they have submitted work throughout the year. So I'm very anxious in those days when I get my final results. I definitely, as Zinat's mentioning, I empathize with them. I put myself sometimes in their shoes. I'm also a realist. I know when my students have done their work or not. So I'm not worried so much about the guilt in that sense.
Recording in progress.
Again, I hate exams as a student. I'm so happy that today, when I did my master's, it was just assignments. I'm planning on doing a PhD and I know it's just assignments, and that's great for me. But the fact that we have gone through exams and remove that, I am terrified of. So I don't agree that we should remove exams. It's just one more process. Should we remove the sole pressure? Yes, definitely, but not remove everything. So what should we be looking at? Now, we know there are basic principles of testing. Okay, what are I like that question, Anila. Please keep that question for the end. I am planning on answering that. I think that's a really good question. I'm going to write it. I'm going to go old school. I'm going to write it down so I answer it. To particular benchmarks. Thank you. Thank you, Anila. I want to answer that and it will get lost in the chat. So let's have a look at the basic principles of testing. It should be practical and fair. These are the things that we need to design your own tests. In my case, I usually use past papers because I'm language and literature. Even though the texts change, the content might change, but the overall content of literature doesn't change. The exploring of the times, exploring of the characters, exploration of the text, that doesn't change regardless of the text that I use. So using past paper questions is fine for me. Plus, it allows me to have that reliable level of expectations from my students and what they will have in those official exams. Again, that's my experience. In other subjects, you might have to change. For example, I know my maths teachers work really hard to try to use, and they might remove one exercise from each of those papers in order to create a new test. Because what happens with them, for example, Zinat mentions a mixture of past papers. What happens a lot to math teachers is that maybe in year 11, they can test one thing, but year 12 need to expand a bit more, but they don't have year 11 testing material. Okay, so they might, because they haven't delivered all the content. So it's a different way of approaching these things. And whatever it is that you do, we need to make sure that they are reliable, they are valid, they're practical and fair. It's not fair to ask students, and this was a very common practice in my country, which I am embarrassed about. And to this day, teachers at universities are proud when a vast majority of students fail their subject. There's a pride in the sense of, well, only 5% of my students pass my exam. And for me, that is awful. What did you do, or what aren't you doing? For me, it reflects so poorly on the fact that they don't. So what do we have here? We have here these aspects, basic principles. So can you please see if you can identify relative validity, practical fairness, which is which? Asaya, that is a question that I'm planning on answering at the end. A test should be, in other words, if a group of students were to take the same test on 2 occasions, the results should be the same. A multiple choice is reliable. It needs to be reliable. A test should be reliable. Multiple choice questions are the easiest to correct, which we all love, but the most difficult to do, because we really need to think about each question and each option that we give to make sure that there's only 1 or 2 reliable answers. Again, I hate creating multiple choice questions. Today, I use a lot of ChatGPT, but I need to go through maybe 3 or 4 times on one question for the AI to fully comprehend and fully get to the level that I want my students to get to. Every test should measure whatever it's supposed to measure and nothing else. If we ask our students to write a composition, we should test only their ability to write and not their knowledge of the world. Exactly, it's valid. It needs to be valid. If we are asking students to interpret a piece of music, of interpreting music, should they have? Are we focusing too much maybe on the technique or the ability to interpret? Maybe they missed 1 or 2 notes, but is the overall result still valid? Are we testing in maths, for example? Maybe you need to test simple remembering, that memory aspect of the functions, and then maybe you want them to use that function in a sense, not just in the sense of what has been taught, but also making sure that the question is specific. For example, my students have to write essays. When I used to teach English, the essay could be about the environment. Now, they could say depending, of course, on the topic, they could say looking after the environment is absolutely useless. There's no purpose, and nothing's going to happen if we throw rubbish and let pollution fly. Because I am the composition, the writing task, the use of language, not their ideas. But a lot of the times it's about the content. Did they understand the content enough to be able to expand? My students come to me and say, but expand. My students come to me and say, but why didn't I get a higher grade? This is really good English. Yes, you're right. But did you study the content? There's no proof that you actually read the book. That sort of thing is, so if we're asking students to do a test on a specific topic and make sure that you are testing that specific topic, you are actually asking them to do, that's why it's valid. And of course, practical and fair. It should be easy enough to mark it that it's not too difficult to organize. When I mean easy enough to mark, a lot of us teach we teach probably exams. We teach probably exams that students sit for those international exams. Use that criteria of evaluation to mark. Not only will it be reliable and valid, but also practical for you. Maybe you don't want to assess all the criteria that you have there to assess, but maybe you want to focus on one or two criteria, and you can do that. But an easy test to mark not necessarily is just multiple choice, easy to, tick, 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 and that's it. It's more about being able to identify what's been expected of you. Last year and for the past few years, I have stopped working there. I worked at the university here in our country that prepares teachers. We have specific faculties, and I work in the Faculty of Education. The Faculty of Education, and I was terrified of this, did not have criteria of evaluation. Teachers, so I said, okay, I'll take on the rest of the work. I need the programs, I need the syllabus. Gave me the criteria evaluation. My first question was, what level of English should these teacher trainees have? Oh, they need to have a C1. Okay, good. All right. So I at least had the level of English. What about the content? Where is the criteria? There was no criteria. So from the syllabus, from the learning objectives, I designed the criteria. But there was nothing officially done, which is something that it took me a lot of time to do to make it fair. And to be honest, I don't know if it was fair enough, because my students had that criteria. Another class doing the same subject did not have that criteria. They had something else. So easy to mark means that you are able to, from the learning content, from the learning outcomes, have some form of criteria. So it needs to be fair for students. Test what they should know, what you've taught. It's okay if 40, 50, 60% of your students get one particular question wrong. That means you need to open your mind and say, okay, maybe this wasn't particularly, something easy to grasp. Maybe I gave it at the end of the day, or maybe I didn't teach it properly, or maybe the content that they were given wasn't, that sort of thing. What's your objective, okay, of teaching? So this is what we need to focus on, okay? That is what we need to remember, is that the fact is we are focusing on something that needs to be practical and fair. So when we think about testing, one of the questions was, is there an alternative to tests, like the traditional test? Of course there is. There are many things that we can do, many activities that we can include within those tests. Here, for example, are some of the tools that you probably have chosen, have used sometime. Have a look at these. How many of these have you used? Some have used all of them, some have used 5 to 6. A lot of this definitely depends on the subject. And of course, it does depend on the formative and the summative. Remember, we've already talked about, last week, we talked about the formative and the summative assessment, and we focused on those aspects of the idea of assessment for learning, assessment of learning. So this is great. I've probably used all of them in one time or another, in different ways, of course. For example, with definitions, I do a lot of games with definitions. Even my year 11s and 12s, I play a lot of games with them, and that seems to work for me. It's very positive, those aspects. And, you know, there's definitely a lot of things. For example, responding to diagrams, I don't tend to do because of the nature of my subject, but that doesn't mean that, you know, that doesn't mean anything in that sense. So, no problem, Zinat. So what we've got here is that there's lots of ways or lots of exercises that we can use in tests, and also maybe in another form. For example, my students write a lot of essays. They're very open essays. So instead of maybe asking them just to write on the test, I might ask them to do something in pairs or something for homework or something, you know, in that sense. How you use the tool towards, you know, towards your test is fine. Not everything is just about being a test on a paper. A multiple choice question can be done, or a gap fill activity can be done in a fun way. I use a lot of gap fill. Gap fills, you know, a sentence and maybe something is missing. I usually use that with definitions. So I might ask my students, when I had children, for example, some of it was a very common activity in English, gap fills, but I use it a lot with, today I use it a lot with definitions of literature. So, you know, there are certain concepts that our students need to be able to produce specific words. So I tend to do this. I give them a piece of paper with a gap fill with the answer, and they read it to, you know, they read it to their partner. Okay. So for example, this term means it's a common literary term that uses to compare two things using as or like. And the person needs to say simile. If they say it correctly, they swap papers and they go to find another definition. Now, that way of gap fill, it's nothing new, the activity itself. I'm just doing it in a different way. I'm getting them to move around the classroom, to speak or whatever. So true or false is the same thing. You know, we do true or false activities. We do certain aspects because I know these will appear in the test. In essays, for example, I might ask them to put essays in, you know, to put the essays in order, put the paragraphs in order. This is an essay, or maybe write only an introduction. I might do a game. It doesn't matter how you use the tools, but think about your international test or your test that you choose to do, you design. Which of these tools do you use? And make sure that students are practicing these tools also during the year. It's not just about getting them to learn how to do the exam, but it's more of a, when they come in to a test, if we also have the aspect of, you know, we're working through certain things, so it's fine. And then all of a sudden we have this added difficulty of maybe the first time seeing a certain type of exercise. Students will panic. And if we are at least, students are familiar with a type of exercise, they feel a little bit of leisure. It's all about managing this pressure and managing these things. So can we do alternatives to testing? Of course we can. You don't need to necessarily do only this. You could actually do a test, and maybe they have to defend their test, maybe they have to give an oral or a presentation or whatever of things that they got wrong, or maybe things that they got right. Richmond, your question about, am I supposed to use all of it, all when it comes to literature? Some of these I don't do for literature. For example, I don't respond to I don't complete a diagram. There's no diagrams in my case. They don't have to convert text to a table either. That's not part. These are all in general from all subjects. There might, of course, be some things missing here. But the idea here is that, you know, we tend to think about only the solutions. We only think about the problems, and we need to think outside the box at times. Sorry, at times. and so it's good to see that